The more that I understand men, the more that I recognize my faults. And the more that I understand myself, the more that I understand why I do what I do. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Earthen's Den. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking about toxic relationships and why I almost quit podcasting. Now, first and foremost, I want to thank everybody so much for tuning into my podcast. There was an episode that aired. I think it was supposed to be in the subscription service. I seen a few people tuned into it. It was Loving Single. And I didn't even go back and listen to it because I'm like, oh Lord, what was that podcast episode about? For you guys who don't know, if you don't have a podcast and you're not creating any content that's based on like being boisterous, there is a lot of drafts. There are a lot of drafts. There are a lot of things that you just don't want to air. And so I'm not going to go too far into that because I'm going to talk to you guys about why I almost quit podcasting at the second end of this episode. So I want to jump into this whole phenomenon of like toxic relationships. Now, I did make a YouTube video where I was telling you guys that for me, in regards to toxic relationships, I believe that it's something that is so prevalent because we just don't know what we don't know. I talked to you guys about the issues in the Black community, the breakdown in communication, the lack of respect between men and women. I can go on and on about the global issues and just the systemic issues that we face in our community today and the reasons why we don't have healthy relationships. But first and foremost, I kind of want to talk about my personal experiences. And for me, what I realized is that there's just not a lot of role modeling. Like, I don't think there's role modeling in the Black community on men or women's side. I think for women, I know for myself, there is I don't want to say this. Okay, I'm going to say it. Y'all hear me clearly because I'm going to say this and then I got to like explain what I mean by this. Okay. So maybe this plays into me being a nice girl, right? And then the reason why I'm saying this is because I understand a lot of people aren't going to get it. But I think for myself, from my family, from my own experiences and just living my life and like being present in my life, I realized the true essence of just like things that some Black men go through. You know what I mean? And I'm never making excuses for anybody because I think when we make excuses for one another, we actually enable one another. And I know that there is a lack of parenting and father figures. And there's a lot of things that we have to be responsible for and figure out on our own. But I think that in your 20s, especially, we are dealing with a lot of repercussions of the things that were not done, you know, and the responsibilities that we're not taken care of. And I know a lot of times too, a lot of people talk a lot about the responsibilities of fathers not being there. And I don't think that there's enough conversation about mothers not being responsible. There are a lot of mothers who do not handle their responsibilities. And I think even though, you know, I understand that, right? I understand that. Like I grew up, you know, my mother was a single mother of 5 kids, girl. That's a lot of kids. And so, you know, on top of being a nurse, on top of working full time, like she just said, that was a lot, you know? So there were a lot of things that she just couldn't do and be, and you know what I mean? And so that obviously led to neglect of responsibilities, right? Like when people have kids, and this is what I tell people too, like everybody who's having kids, like, I don't think there's a perfect way to do it. But I do think that, you know, if you're going to have kids, you got to be ready to raise your kids. Like you have to raise them. Like you can't just have kids. You have to raise them. You have to teach them things. You have to discipline them. You have to love them. You have to teach them how to be in the world, how to, you know what I mean? There's a lot that goes into that. But there are a lot of mothers who are not good role models. And there are a lot of mothers who don't stand in position, you know what I mean, and take care of those responsibilities because they feel like, well, if the dad didn't do it, then I'm not going to do it. You know what I mean? And I just don't think there's a lot of conversation around that. And I know from myself, and I talked to you guys about how I wanted this subscription service and the podcast to be primarily for women. But I just think that for me, when I really try to narrow it down, it feels so limiting, and I don't really want anybody to feel left out. Like I said, I see that the analytics, and there were some men who listened to this podcast. So, you know, if I could just create a space for everybody, that would be great. And if we can just bridge the gap in our community, that would be great. I was listening to an author. I'm so sorry. Y'all know sometimes I'll be reading so many books. I just be forgetting the name, but it's just not acceptable. So I'm going to go ahead and fault me for this. But there's this new book called The Boy Crisis, and he talked about why there are, you know, why men are the way they are today, why men are still suffering with like this irresponsibility, these insecurities and inadequacies and all of these things. And for me, the more that I understand men, the more that I actually feel very bad about some of the decisions that I've made. And the more that I just can sympathize with my partner and like, you know what I mean? Like the more that I understand. Does that make sense? And the more that I understand myself, right? For me, I think it's something said about when you get in your 20s. I think it's something said about visiting your roots. And I'm not talking about like visiting your roots, like getting on Ancestry. I'm talking about going to your mama's house, going to your granny's house. Like if you don't live with your parents, then this is evident, because I know me, I don't really go to my mom's. Like once I moved out, I didn't really go. I didn't really visit her until I had to live back with her for a brief period of time, like a year or two ago. But when you go back and revisit your roots and you really get to see why things are the way they are and how wrong it is, and you know what I mean? I think you can get an understanding of yourself, you know, and why you do what you do. And I think that that is something that says a lot. Like, honestly, that says a lot. And so with that being said, me revisiting my roots, realizing that a lot of the things I was taught and I did, like, I felt bad about it. You know what I mean? And it wasn't me like, oh, I'm just making excuses. I just think that sometimes as women, you know, we really have to sit in a space and be like, yo, like, it's not okay. I think it's so easy to put the blame on men, you know, and I think it's so easy for men to kind of put the blame on women too, because I think that men actually have a greater eye at seeing like the mothers who are irresponsible and seeing some women who don't carry themselves in a certain type of way or whatever the case may be. You know what I mean? Like holding themselves to a certain standard. I think that men are better at faulting that versus women. And especially in today's age, because I think that a lot of women, we are coming together because we do see the domestic violence rates. We do see a lot of women losing their lives, right? Breonna Taylor and the many others who did not have the same, their noise didn't carry the same weight as far as like name. I mean, the same, like it wasn't as loud, right? It wasn't blasted all over the media and it wasn't reported and there wasn't, you know, hashtags for their names. Do you see what I'm saying? And so I think because there isn't enough support in regards to that, I think that women have kind of bridged this thing where we like, well, let's stand together and let's just hold the space for us, right? Because nobody else seems to be holding that space. And I remember talking to my grandmother and I said, you know, hey, grandma, do you think that there's a reason why, you know, the George Floyd case went the way it did versus the Breonna Taylor's case? And I asked my grandmother, I was like, you know, kind of seems like when it comes to women, Black women, men aren't loud for us and they're not standing in position for us like we are for them. And my grandmother said, I don't think that they're not standing in position. I just think that nobody's listening. And that was like, that's what made me want to sit here with this podcast. And like, I know I want to speak to women, but I feel like we have so many sources for that. And I think for me, what I want to do with Earth is Then is more so bring us together. You know what I mean? Like, I really just want to create like a really, really cool community. Like I think that it's time to kind of dead the us against them, because at the end of the day, like we're all we have. Like we are, it's a unity. It's kind of like a circle of life. And like, if there's one without the other, then there will be no us, you know, and we all know that Blackness is rich and that it definitely deserves to, you know, be replenished and restored and renewed. And so I think that's definitely a real thing. And so when it comes to the lack of role modeling, it's often something that's only talked about in regards to young women. Young men, but not young women. You know, I remember when I was in the 7th grade, I had this crush. I'm gonna say his name because I don't think it would ever get back to this guy. But his name was Jamal Barker. And we shared, like, we didn't share lockers, but our lockers were right next to each other. And he was not by any means like a popular dude. Like, I think a lot of people wouldn't consider him, you know, like the cool guys, you know what I mean? But this was like my first time in middle school. Yeah, 7th grade. First day at middle school. And he was just so nice to me. Like, I was just like, I really like this guy. And I remember my sister and her friend, they came and it was like, oh my God, you like this guy? Like that? Whoa. Like, and they were clowning me. And so in my mind, I was like, oh, okay, don't date these type of dudes. Find the guys who are like the jocks or whatever. I don't even want to say jocks because that's not like, nobody calls them jocks, but you know what I mean? And so I think that was the moment for me that it switched. And that's the moment for myself that I realized like, oh, okay, right. Following and on top of the subconscious and the just like role modeling I seen in my house and the men that my mom dated, you know what I mean? So it kind of became one of those things where I was like, okay, cool, got it. These are the guys that we should like, right? But I really remember, I was like, wow, I really like this guy. Like, he was just so nice to me. And like, he was so sweet and so respectful. Like, he was real cool, you know, but that wasn't acceptable. And so I think for women, you know, you should really think about those narratives too. Like, who told you that the bad guys were the guys that you should date? Because when I started dating the bad guys, I was was like, oh my God, like, oh my, it was horrible. It was 7th grade year and my boyfriend was locked up. Like, what is this? You know what I mean? Like, that was crazy, right? But like, that was what was told to me, and that's what became acceptable, and that's what for me was like, oh, okay, this is who I need to date. And you know, from my experience with dating the bad boys and even coming out of that space of like conditioning, I never felt like I could be myself with them. I knew for myself, I was a pretty girl, but I never really was like that girl. Like, that was never me. Like, I was always into books. I liked science. I loved reading. Like, that was just my thing. I've always been very nerdy. You know what I mean? And I was okay with that. But it's like, you get to a point where I think you kind of, if you are dating the bad boys and, you know, you look a certain type of way, right? Like, ladies, hear me clearly. Like, when you look a certain type of way, and this is something that I don't think men know either, but like, when you look a certain type of way, you kind of fit into a box, right? Like, for me, being a beautiful girl, like liking fashion, that's why I was like, I really struggled. I'm like, do I want to pursue fashion? Because I really just feel like it falls into this stereotype. And everyone used to be like, oh, you should model. You could be a model. You're so gorgeous. And I was like, thanks so much, you know, but I never felt like that was me. I didn't feel like I fit into those spaces because I was somebody who was boisterous and I was somebody who was very studious, you know what I mean? And I was like a little corny sometimes, but I'm like, this is me, you know? And so it's just so crazy that sometimes that's the standard. And so there would be times where I've definitely met guys who had this expectation for me to be something that I wasn't, or, you know, they had this expectation for me to be stupid, right? You typically see like pretty girls and it's like, oh, the stereotype is that they know nothing, right? I fell into all of those. And so it was like really finding my own way, because you would meet people and they would expect you to be superficial like them, or they would expect you to be something other than who you were. And so I think for myself, you know, falling into those stereotypes, that was very hard, especially as a younger woman, because, you know, you knew you weren't like any of these things, but it was like a lot of people only liked you for that, you know, not really caring about, you know what I mean? So I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, I know for a lot of young men, they will typically find like a pretty girl and they think that she's some type of way and that they have to keep up with X, Y, and Z instead of just being themselves around her, right? It's like the Superman, Clark Kent, Lisa type thing, you know, but that was never my story and that was never me. And so that I really struggled with that. You know what I mean? That was really tough. So yeah, that's my little personal testimony on that. But yeah, so I think that was for me, that was the start of the toxic relationships. I realized that at that moment, that was what was praised and that was what was accepted. And so I think that kind of becomes a norm for a lot of people, honestly. And I think, you know, it's the things that we're told, the stories that we're told. I knew for myself, typically me being on the front line is like Jalen, like this studious girl who wears glasses, who, you know what I mean, who's just nerdy, like who likes facts, who's just like really cool, who's really into science and nature and dirt and like all of these things, right? That journalist nerdy girl, like nobody was checking for her. You know what I mean? Nobody was checking for her because, and that was me though. You see what I mean? Like that was who I am, but that's not what men are taught to like. And I think that this is something too that I think that men have to recognize as well. Like you all have definitely been lied to, right? It's like, oh, the cheerleader, the girl who looks like this or the girl who looks like that. But it's like, yeah, but is that the type of girl you really want to be with, you know? And so for me, like I said, it's so contradictory because I fall into both. Like I'm not that girl, but I look like it on the outside. Like, dang, who put me in this body? You know what I mean? And there would be times where I definitely felt often, you know, I had to prove to people that like, hey, look, I'm not like that. You know what I mean? I'm not this kind of girl, but that became exhausting. So anyway, I think that men are taught to like a certain type of female. And I think in today's society, it makes it 10 times harder because now it's all about the physicality for real, for real. I'm talking like big booty Judy. You know what I mean? Like that's what's accepted in today's society. Like, you know, being a skinny girl, it's almost like people treat you like you're like, I don't know. It's weird. It's weird. Like, and I think for me, I'm very confident in the way I look. And so I'm not really like phased by it. And I can't say that I notice it to an extent, but it's almost like people are like really, really working hard to better themselves physically. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like I think working out and things like that stuff really does help with like your dopamine increase and just like releasing stress hormones and all those beautiful things. But I just feel as though it's almost to a point where we focus so much on that it's like there is no substance and there is no personality beneath that. And I've always led with my personality because, well, I was always beautiful. So I didn't want to be known for that. I wanted to be seen, you know? So Yeah, that's just kind of like my little forefront in regards to the toxic relationships. But so yeah, in summary, you guys, I think that toxic relationships are just something that is praised. I think that we praise dysfunction. We say things like, "Oh, a relationship is supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be complicated. It's supposed to be all of these things." When in the truth is that a relationship should not be any of those things. I think that you definitely have some things that are hard. And here's the thing too, like I'm not here to say that a relationship should be smooth, easy breezy, going, flowing, right? Like I'm not here to say that. I'm not naive enough to say that. But what I will say is that I think that you have to discern and understand for yourself and kind of just like use your wisdom. And like, I ain't even gonna say it's wisdom. I think it's just like common sense, and know like what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. If someone's hitting you, if someone's calling you out your name, if someone's disrespecting you to just like that degree, then you have to recognize, you know what, hey, this is not healthy. This is toxic, right? But it's almost like we don't even know how to deal with any level of confrontation. And if someone's like, hey, I'm dealing with these things and I'm working on dealing with these things and I want to bring this to you and that we can try to figure this out together. I think that is where we have to kind of recognize where it's not a toxic relationship. You know what I mean? I don't think that we talk enough about holding the space for each other as Black men and Black women in our community. And I stress this so heavily on this platform because it frustrates me sometimes. It frustrates me how men will bash women and how women will bash men. But it's like we all didn't have fathers. Like, what are we really talking about? You know what I mean? We've all grew up with some sense of survival mentality. We've all been deprived of a level of resource, whether it was a father, whether it was a mother, whether it was, you know what I mean? Just like, come on. You know what I mean? The list goes on and on. But I just think that if we could sit in that space with one another, we can have way better relationships. I think the problem with us has been that we've been put against each other for so long that we don't even. And then here's the thing, too. Nobody's even really learning about their history. I don't even think that history is something that is even being discovered or searched upon or even like learn to even eradicate and do it in a different way. You know what I mean? Like we're repeating a lot of the things because nobody's learning about history. You know what I mean? And so that's another thing too. And that makes me I'm very worried for our youth because it's like they don't learn about their history, and I talk about Sarah Bartman and just that whole experience in itself. Like, I think if you could sit in that space and understand where you came from, you wouldn't make the same decisions. And I'm not saying you're perfect, like you don't have to be perfect, but I just think recognizing these things and understanding these things is real. You know what I mean? So that's like my biggest thing. And so until we can really sit in that space and understand that, hey, we have the same stuff, like maybe your stuff looks a little different than mine, but we all got stuff. You know what I mean? And I think for me, when it comes to that, it's understanding whose stuff is worth going through it with. You know what I mean? And I think it's understanding that if someone has some stuff and they're working towards that stuff, and I'm not talking about just like, oh, yeah, I'm working on it, whatever. You know what I mean? I'm talking about like actually going through and putting in the work. Now, for me, this is a little funny. It's a little funny because for me, I did always have stuff, but I was always working on my stuff, right? Like I would read books. I did therapy. I did a lot of things to work on my stuff. But I think that because I met partners maybe who didn't work on their stuff or who didn't face their stuff or who wasn't willing to deal with their stuff, I was the one who was like, unfortunately left in those situations where it was like, yeah, no, I don't want to deal with this. You know what I mean? So I think you have to find someone who is willing to work with you on their stuff. And I think if two people are both working on their stuff and you guys are communicating, then I think it could be fine. You know what I mean? When I say hard work, I think it's more so like people talk about this idea of forcing things. I think we have to be mindful of the climate in which we're living in today. There is a lot of noise around relationships. There are so many people online with these conversations that are just like really centered in unawareness. If you ask me, I think that they're centered in some level of insecurity. And when I say insecurity, I feel as though some people get online, they have a right intention to bridge the gap between male and female relationships in the Black community. But it's almost like they're coming at it from an angle where it's very disrespectful, it's belittling, it's condescending, it's not empowering. And I don't feel like it's really in a space that is healthy enough to communicate. And so for me, what that looks like if you have to get online and you have to call people names, if you have to get online and you have to bring a person down and point the finger and say, this is, you know what I mean? If you can't communicate the issue in a healthy way, then I think that you may be projecting. And I think a lot of people are actually projecting. And so these conversations are very hard to have. And so I think that's an issue. In addition to that, we're in this new age now. We talk about this all the time, this revolutionary age of digital media, this revolutionary age where there's a lot of terms going around. I talked to you guys about like the trauma bonding and why I really, really don't agree with that. And the reason being is because I just feel like a lot of these terms really, really break down connection in our community, and they break down connection in general. I don't think that I've ever necessarily met a person and, for the first time I was like, hey, let me tell you about my childhood. Like, I don't think that's ever been a thing, but I think I noticed for myself, I've always been somebody who was easy to talk to. And when people come to me about things, and I look at it like, you know what, I've been through that. And I think that this person was sent to me by God, and I want to share some light, and I'm just also a very empathetic person. So I don't look at it and be like, oh, she's trying to trauma bond, right? But I think that conversation in itself is really, really destroying relationships, because first things first, if you're not willing to connect with somebody, you don't really want to get to know a person, then how in the heck are you going to have a connection with somebody? You know what I mean? And then I think there's this other extreme where I feel like there is just this new wave of tolerance, right? Like I said, disrespect and dysfunction is praised. So that becomes another thing. Then you have people who may have been in a relationship and they're celebrities or whatever the case may be. That becomes a thing. So it's like there's so many different avenues that you kind of have to get around before you can sit with yourself and be like, you know what? This is what I'm willing to deal with. This is what you know what I mean? I don't know. I just think that this conversation can go on and on because there's so many loopholes in it. And I don't think this is another reason too. I'm going to go ahead and get on to this next segment. But there's a lot of loopholes that come with these conversations. And these conversations aren't ones that I feel can be had within like a 30-minute segment, because there's so much to uproot and there's so much to bring to the forefront. And I look forward to bringing on guests and really having these conversations because it's a real thing. So, yeah, I think, a lot of times we are in spaces. I definitely think for men too, like this idea, this relationship with money. Well, first and foremost, we all coming out of that survival state. Like, you need money to survive. And I think that we have to kind of accept that and stop making it seem like everything is about money or everything is not about money. And we kind of have to sit in that space as well and understand that, you know what, if I can't take care of my basic needs, then I can't get on to the next level, right? I can't climb the hierarchy of needs, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I can't go on to the next phase in the pyramid because I don't have this structure for myself. I don't have this stability for myself. And even when you're in those spaces and you're dealing with so much, right? We even went through a phase where we realized that, when it came to white people, some white people were getting very bold, and there were things that were being said. There were things that were happening and still happen today where the level of disrespect is just, it's saddening and it's disheartening and it's discouraging. And so now we do see this new incline in entrepreneurship, and people are like, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this, but nobody's talking about what also comes with that, right? And nobody's talking about the prices that were paid for us to be in the situations that we are in today. But that's a whole nother conversation. I don't want to go too far left, but I hope you guys are following me with this in regards to toxic relationships. And I'm just going to conclude with, at the end of the day, I think that there's a level of toxicity, quote unquote, in every person, because when you're in your 20s, your early 20s, later 20s, until you get some help and recognize maybe your 40s, you're not going to realize that what you're doing is not okay. And until you have that reality check and the light goes off and you're like, you know what? I've been taught that to communicate, I have to yell. Right. And you would think, like, for me, I'm like, okay, clearly I know right from wrong. But if you were taught something, then that's going to be your forefront. You see what I mean? So until you really come into that space, I think that you are going to have some level of toxicity. So I think that you should have some grace with yourself. And I think you should definitely seek help. Like, you have to go get help. You have to talk these things out. Now, me, I'm somebody who's extremely self-aware and like very introspective, almost to a fault at times. So I have to be mindful to not internalize, right? Because I'm very empathetic. But I'm someone who's very self-aware in regards to myself. I spend a lot of time with myself. So I'm very aware in regards to some things. And so for me, that typically looks like, okay, I know myself and I know when it's me, and then I know when it's not me, right? And so I think in order to really have a healthy relationship, or at least a relationship that can stand on a healthy foundation, there has to be some level of awareness in this person and in you. And I think that you have to take time to develop a relationship and a friendship, right? to be able to open that space to have those conversations. So it's not necessarily a quote unquote, like y'all like to say, a trauma bond, right? So that's that. And another thing too, I kind of want to touch on this really briefly here, is toxic friendships. I personally think that when it comes to friends who treat you like crap, there's just no excuse for that. I just personally think when it comes to friends and family and people, like, first of all, family is, you just can't get rid of your family. Like, it is what it is. I've learned to have a lot of grace with my family because my family's typically not the ones who's going to therapy, right? That wasn't something that was available to them. They're not here for this whole new wave of like psychoanalysts and all of this stuff. Like, they're not here for it. So when it comes to my family, I have a lot of grace for my family, and I personally feel very blessed, even though the burden is a little heavy. It's a little heavy to be breaking all these generational curses. I ain't gonna lie. But I'm like, you know what? I know that my family, they didn't have these resources. So I take advantage of that. And I'm very thankful to be the game changer, you know? So that's just how I handle that. But when it comes to friendships, you know, I think with anything, you know, two people have to value each other. Two people have to value the relationship in itself. And so that's like pretty much the forefront of, in regards to friendship. If you have someone who doesn't necessarily value that, that's difficult, right? And I think with women especially, we've been put against each other. I was working with a young lady the other night, and we were working with this young gentleman, and, you know, she made a comment to me about taking all the attention. And I was so taken back by this because I was like, whoa. You know, this guy is not like, I'm not, you know what I mean? But I think that just women today, and I think that even some men, like, there is just this, I don't even know what to call it. Like, I don't want to call it desperation. Like, maybe it's just this thirst for attention. And like, I don't know. I just think that in today's age, there's some scarcity that's going on, but I can't say that that's our current age. I think that that's just some people's mindset. So I don't want to necessarily say it's a men versus women thing, but I do see it in women. And I think that there's a level of competitiveness. And I think that that's just a whole nother conversation for another day. But it's really sad how women compete with one another. Because for me, listen, I tell you all the time, I was bullied when I grew up. So let me tell you right now. I'm going to lay it right here, right now. Because I told y'all this before, and I ain't going to say it again. Honey, having had humble beginnings, I knew I was not like the other girls, okay? I knew I wasn't like the other girls. Girl, I was bullied at every school. I was like, I'm not like these kids. I don't know what's wrong with me. At first, I thought I thought something was wrong with me, literally. But then it got to a point where God really used those moments for my good. And so with that birth was a strong individual. So trust me, I can't compete with any of you girls because in my mind, I'm so in tune with who I am. And I'm so like into her, you know what I mean? That I've never been competitive, like ever in my life. Like I could get it tatted, like Bible. Like I've never been competitive with another female because I knew very early on that I wasn't like the other girls. Right? So please spare me with that. So anyway, let's get into the reason why I almost quit podcasting before we wrap this podcast up. And thankfully I didn't quit podcasting, but I will say this. I don't think a lot of people realize when you come online with the platform, when you branch out in your new state or when you branch out in your city or your new city, wherever you are, and you're doing a new thing and, you know, you're having conversations about certain things, you're still finding your footwork, right? And so for me with Earthen's Den, like I said, here we are again, and I'm back to neutralizing my platform, and I'm not making it specifically for women, even though I started to. There is a lot of loopholes in regards to conversations today. And one of the things too I can say is that people will take something you said and then they will just like twist it and make it something else. And me being a woman of character and being someone who is integrous, it makes it really hard. You know, it makes it really hard to want to be on the front line sometimes. And though I'm very passionate about it and I keep doing it and I keep sticking with it and I'm learning like, okay, what do I want to talk about? What do I not want to share? You know, it's a process. And so I've just seen certain things that have come up, and it's just, you know, I have seen people online like posting like weird things after I say something. It was kind of like a competitive type thing. It was like those weird haters that are like in the shadows. And I don't think people talk about that either. But like when you put yourself on the front line, it's like people just have this false sense of like this false sense of perception about you. Like they think they know you, and it's weird, and they feel like they can compete with you, or they feel like, I don't know, it's freaking weird, man. It's weird, right? So there's pressure in those areas. And then there are people who, you'll meet them and they may listen to your platform and they may sound like you. And that's a little scary sometimes, right? And then you'll have people who you may meet and they either play a role to be someone that they feel like you may like, or, they may have this expectation for you to be someone that you're not because they follow your art. And so being on the front line has been, it's been trial and error. And I can honestly say I wasn't ready for it. And this is why, people are always like, there are some people who do strive for fame and they do strive for these things. And I can just say, honey, it's just not normal. It's just not normal. I don't think that any of us were built for that large following or so many people looking into our lives, right? So I had to learn to set some digital boundaries. I had to be mindful of what I shared and like what I spoke about. And I'm going to have to be more structured. I could definitely say be a little bit more structured, because typically when I get on here and I make my podcast, I know what I'm going to talk about. And so that's what I talk about. You know what I mean? Like I don't do like the 3 key points and all of that stuff. Like this is what I do. I'm new to this, but I'm true to this. You know what I mean? No, I'm kidding. So no, for real. So it's like, I get on my platform and I share from my heart and I share from my experiences and things like that. But that level of exposure, it's just a different sense of vulnerability that I'm just not sure I personally want to I'm not sure if I want to share that level of vulnerability for myself. You know what I mean? And I said it like that because I need to blow my nose. But yeah, so, that's definitely been one of the things I've almost, that made me almost quit podcasting, because I'm like, yeah, it's a little bit that comes with it. And I think, like I said, for myself, the work that I do, you know what I mean? And what I love to do and connecting with people and all of this stuff, like it just, it can be kind of tricky at times, it really can be. So, yeah, that was just something I kind of had to, I'm still learning, I'm definitely still learning, but I definitely would say for anybody who may be, thinking about it, or you have your own platform, it's like, you definitely want to be mindful of like what you're sharing, and you want to be mindful of the conversations you're having and things like that, because, like I said, today, so many things just go so far left. Like, some people will hear one part of a podcast and then they're just like, oh, this is, you know what I mean? And they try to judge you, or, misjudge you, or put you in this space where it's just like, hold up. You know what I mean? Like, I'm totally for men, right? Like, I love men. What are you talking about? Then it's like, you hear something like I put out the podcast and I talked about desperation, and, sometimes I go back and play back my podcast, and then sometimes I don't. It just really depends. But there'll be times where you put out something and, people will take that and just like run with it. So it's just like, it's crazy. So you just kind of have to be mindful of what you're sharing. And I'm still learning. So I thank everybody for tuning in and just having that grace with me. But I hope this podcast was insightful, and I hope that, I shared some truths, and we got some resolutions in regards to toxic relationships. At the end of the day, don't tolerate disrespect, but I think you got to have some grace, and the reason I say that is because, finishing up, the issues in our community, our history, and just the breakdown in communication and connection today overall, like it's just a lot of influence, you know what I mean? So you just kind of have to be mindful of like, what am I sharing? What is okay? What is not okay for me? And at the end of the day, it's getting to a space where you are, I don't want to say comfortable with yourself, but like, I don't know, just listen. I think my biggest thing has always been, I don't want to tell people how to be. I want to have a conversation for people to express themselves. And if we could find a common ground, that'd be great. A common ground of understanding. You see what I'm saying? So that's been my biggest thing too. Like as this year ends, you guys, with Earth and Zen, I learned so much within this first year. First and foremost, let me just say that, I've been on this podcast for a year. I learned so much, like about just everything, how I want to go, and, the way in which I want to converse and what I want to share. But I think overall, for me, the foundation is just understanding. And if we can just bridge the gap between those gaps, then that would be great. So I hope everyone enjoyed this podcast, and I hope everybody has a great day. I look forward to having guests on here so that we can hear a different voice other than my own for the first year, even though I think my voice is amazing personally. I look forward to having that variety and that versatility. So thank you guys so much for like learning learning with me and growing with me. I feel like, the love and the appreciation that I do get is the listens, but there have been people who've reached out to me and told me they listen to the podcast, and that's really, really dope. That means a lot, because it's like, okay, cool. Each one, teach one, right? I'm touching one person, that's good enough, right? So I hope everybody has an amazing day. Make sure you guys have your eggnog. Chobani Tea has the best eggnog ever. It's like so delicious. It's oat milk, but it's like eggnog. It's so good. And I've been making cookies. Oh, man, seasonal depression is not rolling up on me, honey. No, it's not. We're not doing that. All right, guys. I hope everybody has an amazing week, and we'll talk soon.